While they were all pretty good, a few were on another level, like this one that came from Tracy in the UKK. Her husband Gary is employed at a local steelworks, and one of his workmates, who we'll call Derek, enjoyed playing pranks. Like, really enjoyed it. Gary ended up having to cut his hair to get the helmet off, leaving him with no option but to shave the rest of his head. The crane operator happily agreed to. No questions asked, but because all the crane operators had already left, there was no way to get it down, and he had to spend the entire weekend without his precious motorbike, racking up expensive taxi fares to get around. Well, when it's eventually brought down, I don't imagine Derek will be keen to start pranking again. Pete's fiancée, Rebecca, had some expensive wedding plans, and her father was happy to pay for it all. However, during her bachelorette party, Rebecca drunkenly admitted to her friends that she'd cheated on Pete. And not just once, but more times than she could remember. He was expecting Pete to have a major reaction to this, but he started laughing. It turned out Pete had suspected Rebecca of being unfaithful for a while, and had hired a private investigator to follow her. The truth, he assured Paul, would all come out in good time. There, they all found packets containing photos of Rebecca smooching other men, quickly removing all of Rebecca's possessions and dumping them in the yard before changing the locks. Well, I guess he technically did make an honest woman of her, in that he showed everyone she was honestly a cheater. But if you've ever had to live under a bad landlord, a story from 14 years ago belonging to a now deleted Reddit user, who I'll call Angela, might make all that rent money feel well spent. You know, typical scumbag species of landlord. After raising the rent for the third time in a single year, Angela decided to move out. On the last day of her lease, she'd cleaned up and removed the last of her belongings by 1 p.m. Without anyone around, she located an outdoor faucet that she'd seen a few times on a set of stairs leading to the building's basement, and turned it on. She moseyed past the building a few days later and noticed that faucet was still on, a deep pool of water now swamping the door. Clearly, the landlord hadn't been around in a while because his basement storage room was completely flooded, undoubtedly ruining everything, including tens of thousands. Uncle Dale was a senior engineer at a small firm in the US, and while not in his job description, he was also the one who organized the office parties. A few minutes later, the doorbell camera app pinged on his phone. The footage showed Brad, the owner's nephew who had also worked at the firm, sneaking up to the box and opening it before realizing there was nothing inside it and guiltily slinking away. Dave knew the footage didn't actually prove anything, and he wanted to teach this Nepo baby a lesson he'd never forget. So Dale asked some of the firm's engineering students to create a box that, when opened, would play the loudest, most obnoxious noise possible, and you could only do that by hitting a hidden switch at the back. Dale then proudly glued the box down to the table with industrial-strength glue, shut the lid, and then loudly announced that someone had kindly donated $50 before walking away. Everyone, including Brad's uncle, came to look and watch as Brad was desperately trying to close the box lid. But to no avail. The thief had been caught, red-handed and in full view of the boss. 15 minutes later, Brad had packed up all of his things and been kicked out of the office. Back when Verica was a student, she shared accommodation with another student called Sophie, who, it turned out, didn't understand basic manners. And annoyingly, this would happen often, with most of Verica's baking ending up being sneakily gobbled down by her greedy roommate. Verica told her to stop, but Sophie repeatedly ignored her. So, Verica decided to do something she wouldn't be able to ignore. It was only when she was down to the last few cookies that Verica marched into her room and told her she'd actually eaten close to half a pound of mealworms. Sophie's face dropped, and she started screaming. She ran to the bathroom, and all Verica heard for the next few hours were the sounds of retching and heaving. Eventually, Sophie emerged, and her entire face was bloodshot from puking so hard. Tattoo far now, I love a good prank. But the pranks couples can play on each other are elite. Playing a prank on your partner is funny for reasons I just cannot explain. Instead, he decided to get a picture of her. Not a nice one. An unflattering one where she was asleep, really bringing out all the details. Okay, now that is commitment to the venge. At first, his wife was absolutely furious, but eventually came around to see the funny side of it. But we all know the golden rule. On the internet, never feed the trolls. At first, modern-day Angel looked like he was going to let it slide. He got the picture of Max's dad tattooed on his thigh next to the Grim Reaper. That is a level of disrespect I didn't even know existed. Guess Max's dad is with the Angels now, but I want to talk about one which backfired so badly. It made major news headlines all over the world. David and Ina Steiner, a couple who live in the US state of Massachusetts, own a blog called E-Commerce Bites and regularly publish articles on e-commerce news. David Wenig instructed his staff to take the Steiners down. Soon, the Steiners began receiving things they'd never ordered, and not nice things. Well, this is revenge overkill, even by my standards. Now, what were they expecting to happen? Well, it turns out this was all part of what the executives called a white knight strategy. When the Steiners eventually contacted eBay about all the hate they were receiving in relation to their coverage, so what was their undoing? The pizza. Yeah, believe it or not, after police began investigating this cyberstalking, they discovered a gift card was used to pay for the pizzas, which had been bought in Silicon Valley, just a few miles from the eBay headquarters. It was at this point that the police got the FBI and eBay's own lawyers involved, which the executives hadn't expected. They matched all the fake social media accounts, threatening parcel deliveries, and stalking to some of eBay's safety and security unit. By November 2022, 7 employees were sentenced collectively to more than 100 months of prison time for their roles in this crazy plot. However, CEO David Wenig stepped down as CEO in September 2019 and was not charged. When Mike was in grade school, he usually kept a bag of chips in the side pocket of his backpack. The only problem was another kid, who I'll call Dave, noticed this, and Dave was a major douchebag. For 5 days in a row, Dave did this any chance he got, and Mike was powerless to stop him, or at least until he got a wicked idea. He turned up to school the following week, and right on cue, Dave punched the backpack pocket as hard as he could, shrimply the best. Have you ever been cheated on? Trust me, it sucks. But it's also why this story of revenge, from a now deleted Reddit user, makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. She'd been studying really hard to get her master's degree, and for a few months, she'd been spending every waking moment on her thesis. She logged onto her account for a hotel chain she regularly used, and suddenly noticed there were several bookings for a hotel in London that she hadn't made. One of which was booked for that very day. The concierge, concerned about potential identity fraud, revealed he'd checked in with another woman, and yeah, it was clear John was cheating on her. And if the multiple room bookings were anything to go by, he'd been doing so for a while. Beth was instantly heartbroken, but kept her cool on the phone. Over the next few weeks, she began slowly packing her stuff up into boxes, saying she was just doing some spring cleaning and reorganizing. She also told their downstairs neighbors what John had done, and, disgusted by his behavior, they vowed to help her however they could, and even glued them to the hot water pipes around the apartment. She then locked the door, said goodbye to the neighbors, and left. When he returned a week later, he suddenly found his keys wouldn't open the front door. He rang all of his friends, none of whom would pick up, and then once again desperately tried to reach Beth, calling and messaging, demanding to know what was happening. She simply messaged back, "Maybe you can get a hotel," before blocking him. That's pretty savage, but it didn't end there. A few months later, the downstairs neighbors rang Beth, sounding very excited. They said since she'd moved out, John hadn't been able to afford the mortgage repayments on his own and was being forced to sell the property. She asked why he hadn't just moved his new girlfriend in, and they said they think it was because the source of the fish stink still hadn't been found. So, with no one wanting to live there with him, he was forced to sell at a pitiful asking price, losing at least pound 40에. Man, do I love a happy ending. Which of these stories was your favorite? And do you have one that you think belongs in this series? Remember to email me at revenge@beamazed.com. And as always, thanks for watching.